Mary Elizabeth Jenkins entered this world to Archibald and Elizabeth Ann Jenkins on a tobacco plantation near Waterloo in southern Maryland. Historical records offer conflicting accounts of her birth year, suggesting either 1820 or 1823, with May being the most commonly cited month. Tragedy struck the family with the passing of her father in the autumn of 1825, when Mary was only either 2 or 5 years old. Subsequently, her mother inherited their estate. Mary found herself enrolled in a private Roman Catholic girls' boarding school, the Academy for Young Ladies, in Alexandria, Virginia, on November 25, 1835. She spent 4 years at the Academy for Young Ladies, departing in 1839 upon its closure. Mary Jenkins encountered John Harrison Surratt around 1839, a meeting that occurred when she was either 16 or 19, while he stood at 26 years of age. Orphaned, John found guardianship under Richard and Sarah Neal of Washington, D.C., a prosperous couple with agricultural interests. Their union took place in August of 1840, possibly within the confines of a Catholic church in Washington, D.C. Relocating to Oxon Hill, Maryland, where John acquired a mill, the Surratts embarked on building their family. Over the subsequent years, they welcomed 3 children: Isaac, born in 1841, Elizabeth Susanna, fondly called Anna, born in 1843, and John Jr., born in 1844. In 1843, John expanded their property holdings by purchasing 236 acres of land, known as Foxhall, followed by an additional 119 acres after Richard Neal's passing. By 1845, they returned to John's ancestral home in the District of Columbia to assist his mother in managing the Neal farm. Tragedy struck when Sarah Neal passed away in August of 1845, leaving the farm entirely to John. John's behavior deteriorated progressively. He sought employment with the Orange and Alexandria Railroad, while Mary sought refuge with her cousin, Thomas Jenkins, in Clinton. Despite initial reluctance, Mary found herself compelled to reunite with John in December of 1853, after he liquidated their properties to settle debts. In a bid to stabilize their financial standing, John invested in real estate, acquiring a townhouse on H Street in Washington, D.C., which he rented out. Additionally, in 1854, he expanded his business ventures by establishing Surratt's Hotel as an extension of his tavern. That very year, the vicinity surrounding the tavern was formally designated as Surrattsville. Despite its reputation as a bustling crossroads, Surrattsville was modest in scale, with only the tavern, a post office housed within, a forge, and a handful of residents, including some log cabins. John Surratt assumed the role of the hamlet's inaugural postmaster. He diversified the family's assets by divesting land, alleviating debts, and launching new ventures. Over the ensuing years, Surratt either acquired or constructed various facilities including a carriage house, corn crib, general store, forge, granary, grits mill, stable, tobacco curing house, and wheelwright shop. Financially stable, the family could afford to enroll all 3 children in nearby Roman Catholic boarding schools. Isaac and John attended St. Thomas Manor School, while Anna joined the Academy for Young Ladies. However, the burden of debt persisted, exacerbated by John Surratt's escalating alcohol dependency. In a bid to settle debts, he sold off an additional 120 acres of land in 1856. By 1857, the Surratts had divested themselves of nearly all their extensive holdings, retaining only 600 acres from the original 1,200. Most of their slaves were also sold to alleviate financial strain. Despite these efforts, John's alcoholism persisted, with Mary confiding in a letter to their local priest that he was inebriated daily. The onset of the American Civil War on April 12, 1861, found Maryland, a border state, aligned with the United States. However, the Surratt family harbored sympathies for the Confederate cause, a sentiment reflected in their tavern, which frequently welcomed fellow sympathizers. Notably, the Surratt Tavern served as a secret hub for Confederate spies, with evidence suggesting that Mary likely possessed knowledge of these activities. Following Abraham Lincoln's inauguration on March 4, 1861, Isaac departed Maryland for Texas merely 3 days later, enlisting in the Confederate States Army. Similarly, John Jr. abandoned his studies at St. Charles College in July of 1861 to assume the role of a courier for the Confederate Secret Service, facilitating the transport of messages, currency, and contraband across enemy lines. The Confederate activities centered around Surrattsville drew the scrutiny of the Union government. In late 1861, Lafayette Baker, a detective within the Union Intelligence Service, along with 300 Union soldiers, established a camp in Surrattsville to probe into the activities of the Surratt family and others suspected of Confederate affiliations. Baker swiftly uncovered evidence pointing to a robust Confederate courier network operating in the vicinity. Despite several arrests and warnings, the network managed to evade dismantlement, persisting in its operations. John Surratt's sudden demise occurred either on August 25th or August 26, 1862. The cause of his passing was attributed to a stroke, plunging the Surratt family into grave financial distress. Following his death, both John Jr. and Anna abandoned their education to assist their mother in managing the family's remaining agricultural holdings and enterprises. Mary Surratt found herself burdened with unpaid debts and diminishing resources. Feeling overwhelmed by the responsibility of managing the farm, tavern, and other ventures alone, Mary contemplated relocating to their townhouse in the city. On October 1, 1864, Mary took possession of the townhouse at 604 H Street in Washington, D.C. In January of 1865, John Jr. transferred all his property titles to his mother, a move laden with potential implications regarding espionage activities. Mary may have been aware of his motivations, implicating her in the conspiracy. Louis J. Wakeman took up residence at Surratt's boarding house on November 1, 1864. Dr. Samuel Mudd introduced John Surratt Jr. to John Wilkes Booth on December 23, 1864, initiating John Jr.'s involvement in Booth's conspiracy to abduct Lincoln. Confederate agents became frequent visitors of the boarding house, with Booth himself making numerous visits over the ensuing months, often at Mary's behest. George Atzerodt and Lewis Powell lodged briefly at the townhouse. Atzerodt, a Confederate and co-conspirator in the plot to abduct Lincoln, visited the boarding house several times in the early months of 1865. Powell, disguised as a Baptist preacher, stayed at the boarding house for 3 days in March of 1865, while David Harold also made several visits. In March of 1865, as part of the plot to abduct Lincoln, John Jr., Atzerodt, and Harold stashed 2 Spencer carbines, ammunition, and other supplies at the Surratt Tavern in Surrattsville. On April 11th, Mary Surratt journeyed to the Surratt Tavern, apparently to collect debt owed by a former neighbor. However, according to John Lloyd, her tenant, she instructed him to prepare the shooting irons for retrieval. Just before departing the city on April 14th, Booth privately met with Surratt at the boarding house, handing her a package later discovered to contain binoculars. Surratt then instructed Lloyd to have the shooting irons ready for pickup, and passed him another package from Booth. Booth's actual plan to assassinate Lincoln unfolded on April 14th, with Atzerodt tasked with killing Vice President Andrew Johnson, and Powell assigned to murder Secretary of State William H. Seward. While Booth succeeded in killing Lincoln, Atzerodt never made an attempt on Johnson, and Powell failed to assassinate Seward. As Booth and Harold fled the city following Lincoln's assassination, they retrieved the rifles and binoculars from Surratt's Tavern, with Lloyd repairing a broken spring on Surratt's wagon before their departure. Around 2 a.m. on April 15, 1865, members of the District of Columbia Police paid a visit to the Surratt boarding house, inquiring about the whereabouts of John Wilkes Booth and John Surratt. Within 45 minutes of President Lincoln's assassination, John Surratt's name had already been linked to the attack on Secretary of State William Seward. Both the police and the Provost Marshal's office possessed files on John Surratt Jr., aware of his close association with Booth. Some sources claim that eyewitnesses positively identified Booth as Lincoln's assailant, while detectives received information, including tips from an unnamed actor and a bartender, linking John Jr. to Booth. When questioned by detectives, Mary Surratt falsely stated that her son had been in Canada for the past 2 weeks. She also concealed the fact that she had recently delivered a package to the tavern on Booth's behalf. On April 17th, a neighbor of the Surratts informed U.S. military authorities that one of the Surratt servants had allegedly mentioned the presence of 3 men at the house on the night of Lincoln's assassination, with one of them discussing Booth and a theater. Additional information implicated the boarding house as the crucial meeting point for potential conspirators. Either Colonel Henry H. Wells, Provost Marshal of the District of Columbia, or General Christopher C. Augur instructed Colonel Henry Steele Olcott to apprehend everyone at the residence. Late on the evening of April 17th, federal soldiers revisited the Surratt boarding house. Although John Jr. was not found, a search of Mary's room uncovered a hidden picture of Booth, alongside images of Confederate leaders, a pistol, a bullet mold, and percussion caps. As Mary was being arrested for conspiracy to assassinate Lincoln, Lewis Powell, in disguise, appeared at her door. Although Surratt denied knowing him, Powell claimed that he was hired by her for labor the following day. Powell's incongruent appearance and demeanor led to his arrest. He was later identified as the assailant who had attempted to assassinate Secretary of State William Seward. Following her arrest, Mary was detained at the Old Capitol Prison before being transferred to the Washington Arsenal on April 30th. Throughout her imprisonment, armed guards stood watch outside her cell. Despite having a comparatively spacious cell furnished with basic amenities, such as a straw mattress and a table, her confinement was marked by discomfort and declining health. Meanwhile, John Surratt Jr., absent from the scene of the assassination, fled to Montreal, Canada, upon learning of Lincoln's death. The trial of the alleged conspirators commenced on May 9th. All 8 accused were tried simultaneously, including Mary Surratt. Surratt, owing to her illness and gender, received certain accommodations during the trial. Seated separately from the others, she may or may not have had armed guards flanking her, contrasting with the others' restrained appearance. Allowed a bonnet, fan, and veil to obscure her face, she was also exempt from wrist and ankle cuffs in the courtroom. As her health deteriorated, she relocated to a larger and more comfortable cell. Surratt faced charges of abetting, aiding, concealing, counseling, and harboring her co-defendants. Initial efforts by the federal government to secure legal representation for her and the others were met with reluctance from most attorneys, fearing accusations of disloyalty. Surratt engaged Reverdy Johnson as her counsel, though his effectiveness was questioned due to objections raised over his past stances. As a result, much of Surratt's defense was handled by 2 other attorneys, Frederick Atkin and John Wesley Clampett. The prosecution's primary aim was to link Mary Surratt to the conspiracy surrounding Lincoln's assassination. They considered Lewis Powell's appearance at her boarding house 3 days after the president's murder as pivotal evidence against her. Presenting 9 witnesses, the government relied heavily on the testimonies of John M. Lloyd and Louis J. Weichman. Lloyd testified on May 13th and 15th, 1865, revealing details about the concealment of weapons at the tavern and private conversations with Surratt, wherein she mentioned preparing the shooting irons. Weichman, testifying from May 16th to 19th, 1865, provided crucial insight into the interactions between Surratt and the conspirators, highlighting her role in facilitating their meetings and handling incriminating packages. The prosecution built up Weichman's testimony with supporting witnesses. Despite Surratt's denial in recognizing Powell, his subsequent refuge at the boarding house cast suspicion on her. The agents also detailed the incriminating evidence discovered during the search of the house, including photographs and weapons. In response, the defense sought to discredit the testimonies of Lloyd and Weichman, portraying Surratt as loyal to the Union and unaware of Booth's intentions. Anna Surratt refuted claims against her mother, asserting Weichman's role in introducing Surratt and clarifying the ownership of the incriminating items. The defense aimed to demonstrate Surratt's innocence through testimonies highlighting her charitable deeds, religious convictions, and patriotism. Despite flaws in both legal teams' presentations, the trial concluded on June 28, 1865, with Surratt's illness necessitating her absence from the courtroom during the final days. The military tribunal deliberated on guilt and sentencing on June 29th and 30th. Mary Surratt's case was one of the last to be evaluated, due to challenges regarding evidence and witness reliability. Ultimately, on June 30th, the tribunal rendered its verdict. Surratt was found guilty on all charges except 2. A death sentence required the approval of 6 out of the 9 judges. Thus, she was sentenced to death, becoming the first woman executed by the federal government. Accompanied by 2 Catholic priests and her daughter Anna, Surratt was attended to by Father Jacob, who remained with her until the end. As the fateful day dawned, Anna, desperate to save her mother, sought clemency from the White House once more before returning to her mother's side at the prison. On July 7, 1865, at 1:15 p.m., General Hartranft led a somber procession escorting the 4 condemned prisoners through the courtyard and up to the gallows. Each prisoner's wrists and ankles were securely bound by shackles. Surratt, clad in a black dress, bonnet, and veil, led the procession, supported by 2 soldiers and her priests. Over 1,000 individuals, including government officials, military personnel, friends, family, official witnesses, and reporters, gathered to witness the grim event. General Hancock enforced strict attendance regulations, allowing entry only to those with tickets and a valid reason. Photographer Alexander Gardner, known for his documentation of historical events, captured the solemn scene. Hartranft read the execution order as the prisoners were seated in chairs, with Surratt visibly weak or overcome with fear, nearly collapsing into her seat. Bound with white cloth and ministered by clergy members, the condemned awaited their fate. From the scaffold, Powell proclaimed Surratt's innocence before the noose was placed around her neck by a Secret Service officer. A white bag covered each prisoner's head, and as the drop was released, Surratt's last words, spoken to a guard, pleaded against falling. The drop fell swiftly, and Surratt, having barely stepped onto it, swung back and forth at the end of the rope, appearing to succumb relatively quickly. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button to join our community. We upload every Monday and Thursday at 4 p.m. For more content like this, be sure to check out our other videos on the channel. You can also follow us on our other social media platforms for uploads and updates. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.